The elevator doors almost didn't close in time. That was the thought that would haunt Eniola Adenuga for weeks afterward. The terrifying, humbling truth that her entire life had balanced on the half-second delay of a closing elevator door in the Seongwa Tower at 2:47 in the morning. She had been late getting to the 34th floor. Not by much. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Her mop bucket had caught on the supply closet threshold again, that crooked, stubborn metal lip that facilities management had promised to fix for the last 7 months. And she'd had to yank it free, sloshing soapy water across the corridor tiles she'd just finished cleaning. She'd cursed softly under her breath in Yoruba. Omo ale. Fool. Meaning herself. Meaning the bucket. Meaning the building, maybe. She'd pushed the call button for the service elevator and waited. The service elevator, as always, was slow. By the time it arrived and she stepped inside, mop, bucket, supply cart, the weight of a full night's shift still ahead of her, the main passenger elevator at the far end of the corridor was already opening its gold-paneled doors. She caught the flash of light from across the marble hallway. She was already pressing her own floor button. Her own doors were already sliding shut. She almost didn't look. But something made her. A sound. Not a word. More like a frequency. A low, sharp, pressurized quality in a man's voice that the human body recognizes before the conscious mind catches up. The voice of a man who is not asking. The voice of a man who has never had to ask. Through the narrowing gap of her closing doors, Eniola saw 3 men step out of the passenger elevator. The one in the center was the kind of man you noticed the way you noticed a storm front moving across the sky. Not because of noise, but because of the quality of the silence that preceded him. He was tall for a Korean man, broad-shouldered in a charcoal suit that had been cut for his body and no one else's. His face was angular, severe, carved from something that had never learned softness. His hair was dark and pushed back from his forehead with the carelessness of a man who spent no time on his appearance because he had never needed to. His name, though Eniola did not know it yet, was Jang Min-yuk. Chairman. Shadow. The man the Korean criminal underworld called Hyukseong, Black Star, because he appeared without warning and left nothing behind but ruin. He was speaking in Korean. Low, flat, deliberate. The man to his right was nodding rapidly. The man to his left was already on his phone, face turned away, shoulders hunched inward with the posture of someone receiving instructions they did not want to receive. Eniola's elevator doors closed. She pressed herself back against the wall of the service elevator, heart suddenly doing something complicated in her chest. She had heard 2 words clearly before the doors shut. 2 words in English. Thursday. Rooftop. The Seongwa Tower at night was a different city from the one that existed during business hours. During the day, it was all glass and ambition, a 42-story monument to Korean corporate power squatting in the financial district of Seoul, its lobby permanently perfumed with coffee and imported flowers, its elevators populated with men and women in tailored suits who spoke into phones with the quiet urgency of people who believed their conversations were shaping the world. At night, it became something else. At night, it was Eniola's. She had worked the night cleaning shift at Seongwa Tower for 2 years and 4 months. She knew every corridor, every supply closet, every broken tile and temperamental light fixture and security camera blind spot from the basement parking structure to the 38th floor executive suites. She knew which janitors worked which floors and which ones she could trust to cover for her if she needed a few extra minutes on her break. She knew the security desk guards by name, Yoon SSI on Mondays, Park SSI on Tuesdays, old Mr. Bay who brought homemade dosarak on weekend nights and always left her the extra rice. She knew also that the 34th floor was different. The 34th floor had no company nameplate beside its elevator bank. Its glass doors were always locked, always dark, always sealed from the inside. Cleaning staff were not permitted entry. Eniola's instructions, when she'd first been assigned to this building, had been explicit and delivered by her supervisor Mrs. Cho with a particular flatness of a woman who was not inviting discussion. You clean floors 1 through 33 and 35 through 42. Floor 34 is maintained separately. You do not need a keycard for floor 34. You do not go to floor 34. Eniola had never asked why. She was a woman who had learned, in 34 years of living, that some questions were doorways you did not open. Not because you lacked courage, but because you had a child. Because you had a night shift janitor's salary and a 6-year-old daughter and a 1-bedroom apartment in Mapo district, and a mother's bone-deep, cellular understanding that her survival was not her own. It belonged to Bukola. Always, everything came back to Bukola. Eniola finished her shift at 5:30 a.m., as always. She rode the bus home through the pale blue pre-dawn of Seoul in early autumn, her cleaning cart left behind in the supply room, her hands still faintly chemical-smelling despite 3 rounds of soap. The bus was nearly empty. A young man slept against the window. An older woman in a market apron read a newspaper with fierce concentration. Eniola stared at her own reflection in the dark glass and tried to decide whether she had actually heard what she thought she'd heard. Thursday. Rooftop. People said things. Fragments of conversations taken out of context became sinister, became meaningful, became something they had never been. She cleaned 42 floors of a corporate skyscraper. She moved through spaces populated by executives and lawyers and financial managers. She had heard, in the years she'd been doing this, threats issued as jokes, jokes that sounded like threats, conversations about money that chilled her, conversations about power that she had deliberately let slide off her without absorption. She was a cleaner. It was not her job to listen. It was her job to make the mess disappear. She pressed her forehead to the cool bus window and thought, 2 words. That's all it was. 2 words. But the man's eyes had been what stayed with her. In the split second before her elevator doors had sealed shut, those eyes had turned, not toward her, she didn't think he'd seen her, but they'd turned in her direction. Dark. Flat. The eyes of a man who had looked at the world for so long with calculation that the expression had calcified into something permanent, something that was not cruelty exactly but was its own breed of cold. She'd seen eyes like that once before, in a different country, in a different life. She pushed the memory down. She had Bukola to pick up from Mrs. Kim's apartment at 7. Bukola Adenuga was 6 years old, and she was the kind of child who made strangers on the street stop and smile without knowing why. She was small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's round cheeks and a particular quality of focused stillness that made her seem, at times, much older than she was. She asked questions constantly. Why questions, how questions, questions that looped back on themselves in unexpected ways, and she received answers with the grave seriousness of someone filing them away for future reference. She was also, as it happened, completely fluent in Russian. This was not a thing Eniola had planned. It was a thing that had happened through the specific alchemy of circumstances and grandmothers. Eniola's mother, Bukola's Aya Agba, her grandmother, was a woman named Odenaiki Adenuga who had spent 15 years in Moscow in the 80s and 90s, married briefly to a Ukrainian academic, and returned to Nigeria fluent in 3 languages, deeply practical about suffering, and with a suitcase full of Russian children's books she refused to throw away. When Bukola had been born and Eniola had been working too many shifts to keep consistent childcare, Odenaiki had come to Seoul for a year. She had cared for Bukola from 6 weeks old to 18 months. She had sung to her in Yoruba, in English, in Russian. She had read her Cheburashka and Kolobok and Moidada. She had taught her, with the calm patience of a woman who understood that language was survival, to respond in all 3. Bukola had absorbed Russian the way children absorb everything in those first vital years, through the pores, without effort, without resistance, without even knowing she was learning. By the time Odenaiki returned to Lagos, Bukola's Russian was grammatically imperfect but fluent, living, instinctive. A language that lived in her bones. Eniola had known this. She had found it charming and slightly baffling, her Nigerian-British daughter chattering away in Russian to her grandmother's photographs, but she had not, until now, considered it anything other than a sweet accident of circumstance. She had not thought about it as a tool. She had not thought about it as a shield. She could not have known, picking up her daughter from Mrs. Kim's apartment on that pale Tuesday morning, that in 48 hours the language a dead grandmother had pressed into a baby's sleeping mind would be the only thing standing between Eniola and a body bag. Wednesday passed in the particular slow agony of knowing something you cannot confirm and cannot fully dismiss. Eniola went to work. She cleaned her floors. She moved through the nighttime building with the careful, meticulous attention that had always been her way. She was not a careless woman, had never been, had learned that carelessness cost you things you could not afford to lose. She cleaned the windows of the 28th floor meeting rooms and thought about the word Thursday. She mopped the lobby marble and thought about the word rooftop. She replaced the hand soap dispensers in the executive bathrooms on the 35th floor and wondered whether she was catastrophizing, whether she was a woman with an overactive imagination and too much solitary nighttime to fill with stories. Then she passed the 34th floor on her service elevator transit at 3 a.m., and she saw, through the narrow gap in the doors, that the dark glass entry of the restricted floor was lit up from inside. And through the glass she saw the man in the charcoal suit. Jang Min-yuk was standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the 34th floor, his back to her, looking out at the nighttime city spread below him. He was alone. He was holding nothing. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back with the stillness of a man in perfect control, or a man practicing perfect control, which, Eniola would come to understand, were not the same thing. Around him, visible even from across the corridor and through 2 layers of glass, the 34th floor was extraordinary. Not a corporate office. Not meeting rooms or cubicle banks or the standard architecture of business Seoul. It was laid out like something between a war room and a private residence. Dark wood, low lighting, a round central table with chairs and a large screen currently showing what appeared to be a building schematic. And on that schematic, a floor marked at the top. The rooftop. Eniola's elevator doors closed. She gripped the handle of her mop cart and she did not breathe for 4 full floors. She should have gone to the police on Thursday morning. She would think about this afterward. The should-haves, the could-haves, with the particular exhaustion of a woman who knows she made the imperfect choice and also knows, honestly, why she made it. She had thought about it. She had sat at her kitchen table with Bukola eating oji across from her, the morning light streaming in through the window above the sink, and she had turned the options over with the methodical desperation of someone who had no good options. She was undocumented. Her work visa had lapsed 18 months ago during a bureaucratic delay she'd been promised would resolve itself, a promise that had not been kept. She was working on a cleaning company contract that existed in a legal gray zone she could not afford to have illuminated. If she walked into a police station and reported a crime, she would first have to explain herself. She would have to explain her status. She would become, instantly, a problem to be solved before the actual problem could be addressed. And in the time it took to solve her, the word Thursday would become the word yesterday. She had gone to work anyway. She had told herself she was wrong. She had told herself she was catastrophizing. She had taken Bukola to Mrs. Kim's apartment and kissed her daughter's round cheek and breathed in the warm, sleepy scent of her hair and told herself she was going to clean her floors and come home and it would mean nothing. She had arrived at the Seoul Tower at 10:45 p.m. for her 11 p.m. shift. She had found, when she stepped off the service elevator on the 32nd floor, that the building felt different. Not obviously. Not loudly. But the air had a particular charged quality. Too still, too controlled, and when she saw one of the daytime security guards still on duty at 11 p.m. when he should have been long gone, she understood that she had not been wrong. Something was happening in this building tonight. Something was happening on the rooftop. The thing about being a cleaner was this. You became invisible. It was not a metaphor. It was a practical, observed, repeatedly confirmed fact of Eniola's working life that she had stopped resenting and started using. Executives walked past her in corridors without registering her existence. Managers held sensitive conversations in rooms she was cleaning without interrupting themselves to wait for her to leave. She had heard salary negotiations and firing decisions and one memorably uncomfortable affair conducted entirely in hushed voices in a glass-walled office while she ran a mop across the adjacent corridor. She heard these things not because she was eavesdropping but because she was furniture. She was the building. She was the floor they stood on. This was the advantage she had. This was what she used. She moved. The rooftop of the Seoul Tower was accessible via a service stairwell that Eniola had used twice before, once to investigate a reported water leak from a cooling unit, Once because the door had been left propped open and she'd been required by building protocol to check it and secure it. She knew the door code because Mrs. Cho had given her the master access list at the start of her employment. She had never used it for anything improper. She had, in fact, forgotten it was in her phone's notes until tonight. She told herself she was going to look. Just look. From the service stairwell door, there was a reinforced glass panel in it, standard fire door construction. She would look, and if she saw nothing alarming she would walk back down and finish her shift and tell herself the entire episode was a symptom of sleep deprivation and professional paranoia. She climbed the stairs to the 42nd floor. She climbed the additional service stairs to the rooftop access door. She punched in the code. The door opened on a hinge that she had oiled herself 8 months ago, as part of a routine maintenance task, and which made no sound at all. The rooftop of Seonghwa Tower was a flat expanse of grey concrete dotted with HVAC units and ventilation housings, lit only by the ambient glow of the city below and a string of low emergency lighting along the perimeter wall. The Seoul night stretched in every direction, a sea of orange and white and the cold blue of corporate towers, stretching to the mountains that ringed the city like a dark patience. There were 5 men on the rooftop. 4 of them she did not know. One of them, on his knees at the far side, hands bound behind him, head bowed, was someone she did not need to know, because the narrative of what was about to happen was clear in every line of his body. And standing over him, his back to her, that specific silhouette that her nervous system had catalogued and stored 2 nights ago without her permission, was Jang Min-yuk. He was speaking. Low, deliberate, with a measured cadence of a man reciting something he had decided long ago. She could not hear the words. The wind took them. But she could hear the register, the cool, terrible patience of it, and she could see, in the posture of the kneeling man, that he understood what was being said and had passed beyond the point of begging. Eniola did not move. She did not breathe. She stood in the shadow of a ventilation housing, 6 meters from the propped service door, and she understood with sudden terrible clarity that she had made an error in judgment. She had thought she was going to observe. She had not factored in the way the human body freezes when the abstract becomes concrete. She had not factored in the way danger, when it is real and immediate and 3-dimensional and smelling of cigarette smoke and cold concrete, refuses to remain observational. One of the 4 flanking men turned. He was facing in her direction. He had not seen her yet. She was in shadow, she was still, she told herself, invisible. The service door was behind her. 3 steps and she was through it. She needed only 3 steps. She took 1. Her foot caught the edge of a drainage grate. The sound it made was small. A metallic scrape, brief and immediately swallowed by the wind. But the man who had been looking in her direction had the trained reflexes of someone whose survival depended on cataloging small sounds, and his head turned 3 degrees to the right, and his eyes found the shadow where she stood, and for one suspended, airless moment, they looked directly at each other. Then Jang Min-yuk spoke 1 word. She didn't understand it. It was Korean, sharp as a blade, and the 4 flanking men moved in response to it like a single organism. The man who had seen her took 1 step in her direction. Eniola ran. She made it to the door. She made it through. She took the service stairs at a speed she had not moved at in years, her cleaning shoes slapping against the metal steps, her hand on the railing, 1 flight, 2 flights, the blood in her ears a roar, her whole body awake in the particular savage way that danger makes you alive. She did not think. There was no room for thought. There was only the arithmetic of distance. How many floors between her and them, how many seconds she had, which way to move when she reached the bottom. She reached the 35th floor landing and burst through the door into the corridor. She ran to the nearest supply closet. Hers, unlocked, she had her master key, and she pressed herself inside it among the mop handles and cleaning solvents and paper towel cases, and she pulled the door shut behind her and stood in the dark and shook. She could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear, from somewhere above her, the sound of footsteps in the stairwell. Descending. They searched for 20 minutes. She knew this because she counted. She stood in the supply closet in the dark, and she counted each of the 1,200 seconds individually, and she listened to the building around her, and she made herself breathe slowly, steadily, through her nose, the way she had taught herself to breathe during Bucola's difficult birth when the midwife had told her that panic was the one thing she could not afford. At some point during those 20 minutes, she heard voices on the floor. Korean. Hushed. She could not make out words through the supply closet door. The voices moved down the corridor, paused, moved again. Then silence. She waited another 10 minutes after the silence. Then she took out her phone, in the dark, with shaking hands, and she called the only number she could think of. Detective Kwon Juno was not on duty. He was at home in his apartment in Yongsan, eating cold japchae from a container and watching a baseball game with the flat, unfocused attention of a man who needed the noise but could not engage with it. He was 37 years old, 8 years into his career with the Seoul Metropolitan Police, and he was currently in the particular professional purgatory of a detective who had been building a case for 14 months that his superiors kept telling him was not ready and that he knew, with bone-deep certainty, was. The case was called Operation Black Star. The subject of Operation Black Star was Jang Min-yuk. Juno's phone rang at 3:18 a.m. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He didn't. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, low and controlled with the specific over-control of someone managing panic by willpower alone. She was speaking English, accented, British-tinged, and she was saying with terrifying calm, "I am calling because I saw something tonight and I don't know who else to call and I need to know if you are the right person before I tell you what it is." He sat up straighter. "Who is this?" he said. In English, without thinking about it. "My name is Eniola. I'm a night cleaner at Seonghwa Tower." Juno set down his japchae. "Tell me what you saw." She did not tell him everything. Not that first night. She told him enough. The rooftop, the kneeling man, the 5 figures, the scrape of the drainage grate and the eyes that had found her in the dark. She did not tell him her visa status. She did not tell him how her heart had felt during those 20 minutes in the supply closet. She gave him facts because facts were what she could control, and control was what was keeping her from falling apart. He listened without interrupting. He asked 2 clarifying questions. His voice was, she noticed, through the haze of adrenaline, careful. Not kind, exactly. Not unkind. The voice of someone paying attention. "Are you safe right now?" he asked. "I think so. I'm still in the building. I'm going to finish my shift." There was a pause. "That's either very brave or very inadvisable." "It's neither," she said. "If I leave early it might flag something. I need to act normal." Another pause. Longer. "You've thought about this?" "I'm thinking about it now. I need you to stay where you are for tonight. Don't go back to the rooftop. Don't go anywhere near the 34th floor. Finish your shift. Go home normally. Can you do that?" "Yes. I'm going to need your contact information." She hesitated for 2 full seconds. "My immigration status is not something I'm interested in," Juno said. Flat, immediate, entirely without negotiation in it. "I need information about Jang Min-yuk. You may have it. Those are the only facts I'm dealing with tonight." She gave him her number. She finished her shift. She went home in the pre-dawn blue and she lay on her side in her narrow bed and she stared at the wall and she thought about Bucola sleeping in the next room and she understood, fully, for the first time, the depth of the situation she was standing in. Juno arrived at her apartment at 10 a.m. She had slept for 3 hours. She had woken, showered, made tea, sat at the table. She had not woken Bucola, who was sleeping late because it was a school holiday. When she opened the door, her first thought was that he was younger than she'd expected from his voice. Her second thought was that he had not slept at all. He was ordinary looking in the way that some men are. Medium height, lean, dark hair that needed cutting, the particular hollowness around the eyes of someone who had been running on insufficient rest for too long. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a jacket, and he held up his badge with the automatic gesture of a man who had done it so many times it had stopped requiring conscious thought. "Detective Kwon," he said. "I know," she said. Come in. He looked at her apartment with the reflexive cataloguing of someone trained to read spaces. She watched him do it and did not apologize for what he saw. It was clean, meticulously so, small and carefully arranged, with Bucola's drawings on the refrigerator and a bookshelf that held everything from Yoruba language primers to Korean cookbooks to a well-worn copy of Middlemarch. He did not comment on any of it. He sat at her kitchen table and she sat across from him and they went through it again. Everything she had seen in order with detail. She was precise. She had always been precise. She told him about the man on his knees. She told him about the charcoal suit and the clasped hands and the voice that carried even when she couldn't hear the words. The man on the rooftop, Juno said. The one kneeling. Can you describe him? She did. Juno wrote something in his notebook and his jaw did something brief and tight. That may be Lee Dong-hon. He's been missing since Tuesday morning. He was a money manager for one of the legitimate front businesses Jang uses. He paused. We need to establish. I don't know if he's alive. She said it directly because it needed saying. I left before. She stopped. Swallowed. I don't know. We don't either. Not yet. He met her eyes. There was something in his expression that was not pity. She would have closed down immediately in the face of pity, but was something more honest and more useful than that. Acknowledgement, maybe. You did the right thing calling. I did the only thing I could think of, she said. That's usually what the right thing looks like. She almost smiled. She didn't, but the impulse was there, surprising her. Then Bucola's bedroom door opened. Bucola emerged in the specific magnificent chaos of a 6-year-old who has just woken up, hair undone from its plaits, pajama top twisted, one sock on, and stopped in the kitchen doorway to assess the stranger at her mother's table with the unflinching directness that was her primary social mode. Who are you? She said. Bucola, Eniola said. Good morning. This is Mr. Kwon. He's a policeman, Bucola said. Not a question. Her eyes were on his jacket, where the edge of the badge holder was just visible. Juno blinked. Yes. My grandmother says policemen are either dangerous or useful and you have to figure out which kind before you talk to them, Bucola said. Juno looked at Eniola. My mother has opinions, Eniola said. Which kind are you? Bucola asked Juno, perfectly seriously. He considered this for a moment with the same gravity she had offered it. I'm trying to be the useful kind, he said. Bucola evaluated him for another 2 seconds. Then she went to the refrigerator and took out a juice carton and sat at the table and began drinking it with the settled air of someone who had decided to stay for the conversation. Bucola, this is a grown-up conversation. I know, Bucola said. I'll be quiet. She was not, in fact, quiet, but what she said next changed everything. Juno had been describing what his operation needed. Physical evidence, corroborating testimony, ideally something they could use to move on the 34th floor legally within the next 48 hours before Jang Min-hyuk's people had time to sanitize anything the previous night might have left behind. He was speaking carefully, professionally, in the clipped cadence of a man laying out operational parameters, when Bucola said, The Russian men came to the building yesterday. Eniola went very still. Juno's pen stopped moving. What? Eniola said. When I was with Mrs. Kim. She lives near the big building where you work, Mama. Her window looks at the side entrance. Bucola pointed her juice carton in the general direction of Seonghwa Tower. 2 Russian men went in and 1 Korean man went in with them and they were arguing. The Russian one with the gray jacket said, she scrunched her nose, the expression she made when translating internally. He said that the payment wasn't right and that if the Black Star didn't deliver the evidence by Friday the deal was finished. Silence. Bucola. Eniola's voice was very careful. What language were they speaking? Russian, Bucola said. Why? Mrs. Kim didn't understand them. She asked me what they were saying. I told her. You translated for Mrs. Kim? She asked. Bucola looked at her mother with the mildly defensive expression of a child who cannot see what she has done wrong. Was I not supposed to? Eniola looked at Juno. Juno was looking at Bucola with an expression that Eniola had not seen on his face before. Something electric and controlled, the expression of a man watching a door open that had been sealed shut for 14 months. Bucola, he said very gently. Did you hear anything else? Anything at all? What Bucola had heard, it turned out, was enough. She had been sitting in Mrs. Kim's window seat, her favorite spot when she stayed there, a cushioned ledge overlooking the side street, while Mrs. Kim made breakfast, and she had watched the 3 men on the pavement below with the interested attention she gave to everything. She had not known she was witnessing anything significant. She had been watching because the Russian language delighted her. Its sounds, its particular rhythms, and these men were speaking it, and her grandmother's voice was in every word of it. She had heard the gray-jacketed Russian man tell the Korean man that the delivery location was changing. Not the rooftop. Too exposed. The parking structure. Level B3. Service entrance. Friday, not Thursday. The materials, documents, she thought. He'd used the word documentee. Needed to be transferred before the consortium moved the money. She had heard the Korean man say that there were complications. That someone had been dealt with. That the witness, she hadn't been sure about this word, she said, looking at her mother with sudden uncertainty. The witness, maybe, had been handled. Which word did he use? Juno said. Bucola said a Russian word, precisely, in her grandmother's cadence. Juno wrote it down. His hand was steady. His face was not. That's not handled, he said quietly. That's contained. He looked at Eniola. She looked back at him. Something passed between them. Unspoken, complex, the particular communication of 2 people who have been standing at the edge of the same abyss and have just realized they are standing there together. She's not safe, Eniola said. Low, flat, the voice she used when she was most frightened, the one that her fear had learned to wear so that it didn't look like fear. No, Juno said. Neither are you. He moved them that day. Not dramatically. There was no drama in Juno's operational style, she would learn. There was only the steady accumulation of necessary steps taken in the necessary order. He arranged a safe house through a contact she was not introduced to. A small apartment in Mapo district that smelled of other people's cooking and had a window that looked onto a grey courtyard. He arranged security. He called his supervisor, and then a different supervisor, and finally, in a conversation she heard through the wall in a voice that had gone entirely flat, someone above both of them. Operation Black Star was being moved up. She heard fragments of the phone calls she was not meant to hear. She made tea in the safe house kitchen, and she listened to the shape of the situation through walls and door gaps. Jang Min-yuk was bigger than she had understood. The 34th floor was not just a crime operation. It was the sole nexus of a money laundering network that touched 3 countries and $2 billion in illicit funds. The Russian consortium was a connection they had been trying to prove for over a year. The evidence, the documentee that Bucola had heard mentioned, was a file of transactions that would allow prosecutors to tie Jang Min-yuk not just to the physical crimes but to the financial infrastructure. The documents were being transferred on Friday. Today was Thursday. They had 1 day. Juno came to the safe house at 9 p.m. He had changed his jacket. He had, she noticed, eaten at some point, or at least attempted to. There were traces of something hurried about him, the particular dishevelment of a man who had been moving since dawn. He sat at the kitchen table and spread out a map of the Seonghwa Tower parking structure, and he talked her through what the next 18 hours would require. We can move on the B3 exchange tomorrow without you, he said. We have enough now. Bucola's testimony establishes the Russian connection, changes the timeline, gives us the location. He paused. You don't need to be involved in what happens next. She looked at the map. But, she said. But Jang Min-hyuk's people know someone was on the rooftop. They may be trying to identify you. Which means you are involved whether we want you to be or not. What do you need from me? He looked at her. Direct, careful. I need you to stay here with Bucola and stay out of contact with anyone you know until we execute the operation. That's it. That's it. She studied him for a moment. You're not telling me everything. A pause that confirmed it. What else? She said. Juno ran a hand through his hair, the first gesture she'd seen from him that was not controlled, not deliberate. There's a member of Jiang's organization who has been running a surveillance operation on cleaning and maintenance staff. Standard counterintelligence, trying to identify anyone who might have been in the wrong place. He met her eyes. Your supervisor, Mrs. Cho. We believe she's been approached. The cold moved through Eniola slowly, methodically, the way cold does when it is real and not metaphorical. Mrs. Cho called me today, she said. She asked me to come in for an early shift tomorrow. At 7 a.m. Juno's expression didn't change. But his hand, she noticed, had gone very still on the table. You didn't tell me that, he said. I'm telling you now. Are you going to go? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the wall that divided the kitchen from the small bedroom where Bukola was asleep, one sock still on, her grandmother's Russian words tucked somewhere deep and safe in the language centers of her brain. What do you need me to do? Eniola said. She understood later that this was the moment Juno decided to trust her completely. Not because she had offered to help. Trust was not, for him, a thing that simple gestures built. It was because of the way she had asked. She had not offered bravery. She had not told him she was strong or unafraid or ready. She had assessed the situation with full acknowledgement of its danger. She had absorbed the intelligence about Mrs. Cho with visible fear that she then set aside, and she had asked him a functional question. What do you need me to do? The grammar of a capable person. The grammar of a partner. He laid it out for her. She would call Mrs. Cho and confirm the early shift. She would go to the Seonghwa Tower at 7 a.m. under protection. 2 plainclothes officers, one already positioned in the building, one accompanying her from a distance. She would act normally. If Mrs. Cho attempted to make contact with anyone about her arrival, that contact would be monitored. If Jiang's surveillance operation activated, Juno would know the route of information and the identity of the operative. And then the B3 exchange, she said. Then the B3 exchange. We move at 10 a.m. And Bukola stays here. With an officer I trust. She does not leave this apartment until I personally come back for you both. Eniola looked at him. Why should I trust that? It was a fair question, and they both knew it. She said it without challenge, without accusation, as a genuine question about the basis of trust between 2 people who had known each other for less than 24 hours, and were now planning something that had life or death stakes on multiple sides. Juno was quiet for a moment. You probably shouldn't, he said. Not entirely. You don't know me. I'm asking you to trust a process and an institution that has given you limited reason to extend trust. He paused. What I can tell you is that I have been building this case for 14 months. I have lost opportunities and relationships and probably my chance at a normal schedule for the rest of my career because I believe Jiang Minyak needs to be stopped. I'm not going to waste that on being careless with the person who made it possible to move. She studied him. You're tired, she said. Not unkindly. Yes. When did you last properly sleep? I genuinely don't remember. She stood. She went to the kitchen and she made 2 cups of tea, her way, dark and a little sweet, the way her mother made it, and she set one in front of him and she sat back down. Then we'd better talk quickly, she said, so you can sleep a few hours before tomorrow. He looked at the tea. He looked at her. Something crossed his face that was not the careful flatness of the professional hours, something that was more honest than that, more exposed, and perhaps more frightened than he had intended to let her see. Thank you, he said, quietly. Don't thank me yet, she said. Let's see how tomorrow goes. She slept for 4 hours. She dreamed of nothing. She woke at 5 a.m. with the instantaneous alertness that had been her body's response to alarm clocks for years. The shift worker's reflex, the mother's reflex, the 2-in-1. And she lay in the dark of the safe house and she breathed and she thought about Bukola sleeping on the other side of the wall and she thought about her grandmother Odiniki in Lagos, who had taught a baby Russian from picture books and had never known the specific beautiful, terrifying consequence of that gift. She got up. She braided her hair. She put on her cleaning uniform, brought in a bag by the officer who had set up the safe house, retrieved from her apartment, and she looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. She looked, she thought, like herself. Like what she was. A night shift cleaner in a navy uniform with sensible shoes and the composed, watchful expression of a woman who had learned to be the most quiet person in any room. Good, she thought. Let them see the cleaner. Jang Min-yak arrived at the Seonghwa Tower at 7:23 a.m. She knew this because Juno texted her from somewhere in the building. One word, in. She was on the 28th floor. She was cleaning the glass doors of a conference room. Her hands were steady. This surprised her. She had expected to be afraid. She was afraid. It was present, constant, a low electric current running through everything. But it was manageable, was the thing. It had not exceeded her capacity to function. She moved her squeegee across the glass and she thought, this is what you do when you have no other option. You do the job. You do it well. You do it and you keep moving. Mrs. Cho had met her at the building entrance at 7:05 with a smile that was 4 degrees too warm and questions that probed at the edges of Eniola's last few shifts in a way that was clearly structured but not quite skilled enough to be casual. Eniola had answered with careful blandness. She had been thorough. She had noted nothing unusual. She was simply a cleaner completing her assigned tasks. Mrs. Cho had nodded. Had looked at her phone once, twice. Had smiled again. Juno's second text came at 7:51. Contact confirmed. We have the chain. The third text came at 9:15, moving to be 3. And then, 4:44 minutes, silence. She cleaned. She moved through her floors with the meticulous attention she always brought to the work, because the work was real, was the thing, regardless of everything else happening around it. These were real offices, real windows, real floors that collected the real dust of the real human business of living, and her job was to manage that reality and she took it seriously. She always had. She was on the 31st floor, cleaning the executive restrooms, when the building shook. Not seismically. Not loudly. It was a concussion, felt through the floor, through her feet, brief and heavy, and it came from below. Deep below. The parking structure. B3. She stood completely still with her cleaning cloth in her hand and she waited and she did not fall apart, which was the thing she was most proud of afterward, that she had stood there in the executive restroom of the 31st floor with the single worst feeling she had ever experienced. Worse than the supply closet, worse than the rooftop. The feeling of something happening that she could not see and could not control and could not protect against. And she had stood still and she had breathed. And she had waited. Her phone rang. Juno's number. We're okay, he said before she could speak. His voice was not quite steady. It's okay. There was resistance. We have him. She closed her eyes. Are you hurt? She said. No. A pause. Eniola. He said her name with a particular weight, like he was making sure of it. We have him. She sat down on the restroom floor. Tile, cold and clean, her own work, 2 weeks ago. She sat on her own clean floor and she pressed her back against the cabinet and she breathed. And Bucola, she said. Officer Park has already called me. She's fine. She's eating breakfast. Apparently she negotiated an extra portion of rice. Something happened to Eniola's face. She couldn't have described what. Go figure, she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the second word. Go figure, Juno agreed. There was paperwork. There was always paperwork. The particular institutional aftermath of crisis that asserts itself as the adrenaline dissipates, and which is, in its own way, a mercy because it gives you something to do. There were statements and forms and a 3-hour debrief at the Seoul Metropolitan Police Headquarters with Juno's supervisor and 2 other officers and a representative from the prosecutor's office who was very official and kept looking at his phone. Eniola answered every question. Completely. Accurately. She did not omit her visa status. She put it on the table at the beginning and let it sit there and did not pretend it was not what it was. The representative from the prosecutor's office had looked at Juno. Juno had said, in the flat voice he reserved for non-negotiable things, Ms. Adenuga's cooperation was essential to the success of this operation. Her immigration status is a matter for a separate process and is not relevant to her testimony. The representative had looked at Eniola. The testimony of a minor, he said carefully, would typically require. Bukola Adenuga's testimony is corroborating evidence, Juno said. The primary case does not rest on it. Ms. Adenuga's testimony and the physical evidence recovered from B3 are sufficient. Another look. We'll need to speak with the child's testimony as supporting evidence. Through proper channels, with parental consent. Which I'm giving, Eniola said. With conditions. She said it calmly. She watched the representative recalibrate and she did not particularly care what he thought of her. Bukola, when interviewed the following week in a specially arranged child-appropriate setting with Eniola present and a specialist officer trained in working with young witnesses, was perfectly composed. She answered questions in the precise, focused way she answered all questions. She corrected one officer's transliteration of the Russian word she'd heard. She accepted a juice carton and 3 of the biscuits from the plate on the table and showed no signs of trauma whatsoever. Afterward, in the corridor, Juno looked at Eniola with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the slightly undone quality he got when something had exceeded his expectations. Your daughter, he said. I know, Eniola said. She is. I know. Does she have any interest in law enforcement when she grows up? Eniola looked at him. She's 6, she said. It was a future-oriented question. She wants to be a marine biologist. That's also useful, Juno said. She laughed. It came out unexpected and real, unplanned, and she saw him blink at the sound of it like he had been startled by something he had not seen coming. Jang Min-yuk was charged on 9 counts within the week. The charges included 2 counts of first-degree murder. Lee Dong-han had been found, alive but injured, in a shipping container in Incheon. The murder charges were for 2 other individuals whose deaths, previously ruled accidental, were now understood in the light of the B3 evidence to be something else entirely. There were money laundering charges, racketeering charges, charges related to the Russian consortium transaction that the documentee had made undeniable. The 34th floor of Seonghwa Tower was unsealed and went through 5 days of forensic examination that apparently. Juno told her this with the satisfaction of a man who has been waiting 14 months, yielded more than they had hoped. She watched the arrest announcement on the news in her apartment. Her own apartment, she had been returned to it, with Bukola sitting beside her eating gari and watching without quite understanding and then losing interest and going back to her drawings. On the screen, briefly, as they led him out, she saw him. Jang Min-yuk. He was in handcuffs, flanked by officers, dressed in the charcoal suit like he had not had time or inclination to change it, and his face was, still, not defeated, not afraid. Still, in the way a city is still during a power outage. An absence of the usual noise that revealed, underneath, something more elemental. He was walking with the contained, precise carriage of a man who was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him break. But he was in handcuffs. Eniola turned off the television. Bukola looked up from her drawings. Was that the bad man? Yes, Eniola said. Is he going to jail? Yes. Bukola considered this with the gravity she gave to important things. Good, she said, and went back to her drawing. 3 weeks after the raid, Eniola was called to a meeting at the building management offices for Seonghwa Tower. She had expected either termination, the complicated insurance policy decision of an employer distancing itself from a situation that had generated press, or something bureaucratically awkward involving her employment contract and the circumstances that had made the news in fragmentary, carefully managed ways. She had not expected what she got. The building manager, a man she had seen perhaps 4 times in 2 years and who had always looked through her with the smooth non-recognition of someone for whom cleaning staff were infrastructure, was sitting across the table from her with the particular manner of a person who has been told to be careful. He explained that the building's ownership group, a consortium of real estate investors, the kind of men who made decisions through layers of representatives, had decided, in consultation with their legal team and in light of recent events, to substantially overhaul their security apparatus. The head of building security was departing. The structure was being rebuilt. He slid a folder across the table. Chief of Building Security, the title read. The salary was 4 times her cleaning wage. She looked at it for a long moment. I don't have a security background, she said. You have demonstrated operational judgment under extreme conditions, the manager said, with the careful voice of someone reading from a brief. The ownership group believes that the specific kind of intelligence and discretion you showed during, he paused, choosing his words, the recent incident is exactly what the building requires. She looked at the folder. She thought about Bucola's school fees and the apartment and the visa situation that was, through the particular alchemy of having cooperated with a major criminal prosecution, currently being resolved by a lawyer she had not had to pay for. She thought about 2 years and 4 months of invisible work in this building, of knowing every floor and every corridor and every crooked threshold and every supply closet, and she thought about what it meant to be seen. I'll need to review the full terms, she said. Of course. She closed the folder. And I'll need the supply closet on 35 to be properly repaired. The threshold catch has been an issue for over 7 months. The manager blinked. I'll arrange it, he said. Juno brought her the signed documentation confirming the status of her case, the immigration matter, resolved, on a Saturday in October, for weeks after the raid. He came to her apartment. She had made food. This had not been planned. She had been cooking when he called from the street to say he was coming, and it had seemed unnecessary to put it away. He ate with the authentic appreciation of a man who had been feeding himself badly for too long, and Bucola sat across from him and cross-examined him about whether detectives were allowed to have pets and what the rules were about working on weekends. No rule against pets, he said. And technically I'm not working on weekends. Then why are you here on a Saturday? Bucola asked. I'm bringing your mother some paperwork, he said. That's working, Bucola said. It's light administration. Aya Agba says if you do work things on your day off, work has won. Juno looked at Eniola. Your mother is correct about most things, Eniola said. Is she the one who taught you Russian? He asked Bucola. Bucola's face lit up, the particular illumination of a child who has been asked about something she loves. She launched into a story about Odoniki and the Russian picture books and Cheburashka and the specific way her grandmother had said Dobroy Utro every morning. Juno listened with the full attention he brought to everything. She had noticed this about him, the way he listened, completely, like whatever you were saying was the most important intelligence he had received. She watched him listen to her daughter and she felt something settle in her chest. Not dramatically, not with a cinematic rush, but quietly and firmly, the way a foundation settles when it's properly laid. Something that said, this is safe. This person is safe. It had been a long time since she had thought that about anyone. After dinner, after Bucola had been put to bed, after the negotiation about how many stories and the objection to the hair braiding and the final sleepy capitulation that every bedtime concluded with, Eniola came back to the kitchen and sat across from Juno and they drank tea and the apartment was quiet in the particular way it was quiet when Bucola was finally asleep. The case goes to trial in March, Juno said. I know. The prosecutor's office called. You'll have to testify. I know. It will be. He stopped. It won't be easy. Zhang's defense team is aggressive. They'll try to. I know what they'll try, she said. I've been thinking about it. He looked at her. I'm not afraid of it, she said. Not bravado. Honesty. I was afraid on the rooftop. I was afraid in the supply closet. I was afraid when you told me about Mrs. Cho. She curled her hands around her mug. But testifying about what I saw, in front of people, in a room where it is my job to say true things clearly, I'm not afraid of that. That I know how to do. He was quiet for a moment. What were you afraid of? He asked. In the supply closet. She looked at him. It was an intimate question, the kind of question that could only be asked after weeks of the specific intimacy that shared danger creates, The intimacy of having needed each other in ways that bypassed the usual social scaffolding. That I would be right and it wouldn't be enough, she said. That I would know something true and be unable to make it matter. He nodded slowly. She thought he understood this from his own specific experience of it. 14 months of a case that kept being told it wasn't ready. And now, he said. She considered. Now I know it mattered, she said. So the fear is different. She paused. What are you afraid of? He looked at his tea. A long pause. That I'll lose the thread, he said. That I'll stop being able to find it. He stopped. There are cases that break you and cases that build you, and the difference is sometimes just timing and sometimes it's something else. He looked at her. This one built me. I'm afraid of forgetting that. Then don't forget it, she said. Simply. He almost smiled. Almost. It was a near miss of a smile, present in the corners of his eyes without quite making it to his mouth, and she thought, I would like to see that finish. The thought surprised her. She didn't push it down. Thank you for the food, he said. Thank you for the documentation, she said. He stood. He picked up his jacket. He paused at the door. There's a security training program, he said, for newly appointed building security chiefs. The police run it in cooperation with private sector certifications. He looked at her with a carefully neutral expression of a man presenting information. It starts in November. I teach one of the modules. She looked at him. Does it affect working hours? She said. Saturday mornings. Then I'll check my schedule, she said. The almost smile completed itself. This time, fully. Unexpected, warm, rearranging his face into something she had not seen before. Something that was wholly his own, unguarded and real. I'll send you the enrollment form, he said. Do that, she said. The trial of Jang Min-yuk began in March. Eniola testified on the 4th day. She wore a dark suit she had bought for the occasion, and she sat in the witness stand and she told the truth. She told it in the precise, ordered, unflinching way she told everything. The elevator doors, the 2 words, the rooftop, the ventilation housing, the drainage grate, the supply closet. She told it without embellishment and without minimization, and she looked at the defense counsel's aggressive questioning with the specific quality of stillness she had learned in supply closets in the small hours of the morning. Jang Min-yuk was in the courtroom. She had thought about this beforehand. She had decided she would not look at him. She looked at him. He was watching her with those same flat, dark, calculating eyes she had seen through the narrowing gap of an elevator door 3 months ago. The eyes that had not known she was there. The eyes that knew now entirely who she was and what she had done. She held his gaze for 4 seconds. Then she looked away, back at the prosecutor's counsel, and she answered the next question. Jang Min-yuk was convicted on 7 of 9 counts in June. The sentence was 23 years. Juno texted her when the verdict was announced. 7 counts. She texted back. Told you. He called 15 minutes later, and she could hear in his voice, underneath the professional flatness, underneath the control, something that was purely and completely relief, the sound of a man setting down a 14-month wait. How does it feel? She asked. Strange, he said. Good. Strange. A pause. Like the floor being solid again after you've been walking on ice for a long time. Yes, she said. She understood exactly what he meant. Are you working tonight? He asked. I start at 8. She had been chief of building security for 4 months now. The hours were different. She wore a suit instead of a uniform. She had discovered, not entirely to her surprise, that she was very good at the job. That the same qualities that had made her a precise and thorough cleaner made her a precise and thorough security professional, that seeing clearly and thinking carefully and knowing when to be invisible were skills that transferred. I thought, Juno said, with the careful voice of a man who is about to say something he has decided to say, that if you weren't working we could mark the occasion. She was quiet for a moment. The occasion, she said. The verdict. A pause. And the other thing. What other thing? The thing I've been not saying for 4 months, he said. At the Saturday morning training sessions. At the debrief lunches. At your apartment that first night when you made tea without asking, and it was the only thing anyone had done for me without conditions in longer than I can remember. She sat with this. Outside her office window, her office, on the ground floor, a desk and a monitor and a view of the lobby she knew better than almost anyone. The afternoon light was moving across the marble floor. You're saying it now, she said. I thought it was time. Because of the verdict. Because of the verdict, he agreed. And because I have Saturdays free now that the module is finished, and I'm not sure how to structure them otherwise. She felt the smile happen before she could manage it. The same uncatchable thing it had been all those months ago in the safe house kitchen with the tea, unplanned and real. Bucola has a school thing on Saturday morning, she said. But Saturday afternoon is open. Saturday afternoon, he said. There's a market near the tower, she said. I've been meaning to go. Then I'll meet you at the tower, he said. At noon. At noon, she agreed. She hung up. She sat in her office with the marble lobby visible through the glass and the afternoon light moving across it, and she thought about all the floors she had cleaned in this building and all the corridors she had walked and all the things she had seen that she was not supposed to see, and she thought about Bucola asleep in the safe house with one sock on and the Russian words tucked into the architecture of her mind like a gift that keeps on giving, and she thought about the particular way a closing elevator door had failed to close quite quickly enough on a Tuesday night in late September. 3 minutes late. A court mop bucket. A crooked threshold that facilities management had promised to fix for 7 months. The mathematics of everything that followed, laid out in a line that stretched from a grandmother in Moscow reading picture books to a courtroom verdict delivered in June. And she thought, no, you cannot plan this. You cannot engineer it or avoid it or manage it in advance. You can only be paying attention when it arrives. You can only be present enough to hear the 2 words. You can only be the woman who stays in the supply closet and breathes. She straightened the file on her desk. She looked out at her lobby. She thought about Saturday. On a Saturday in late October, a woman walked out of the Seonghwa Tower at noon in a yellow coat that caught the autumn light, and a man was waiting for her on the pavement, his hands in his pockets, his face doing the thing she had decided she liked, the almost smile becoming a real smile, warm and unguarded, entirely his own. Her daughter was at school, making a project about ocean ecosystems. Her grandmother was in Lagos, not knowing that her Russian picture books had changed the course of several people's lives. The building behind her was, for the first time in its history, properly secure. The woman in the yellow coat walked toward the man on the pavement. She did not look back. If this story found you, if you felt every breath of Eniola's courage, every beat of that impossible night, every quiet word that changed everything, then you already know what to do. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What was the moment that got you? Was it the supply closet? The elevator gap? Or the little girl who changed the world with her grandmother's Russian words? Eniola and Bucola's story is proof that the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary power. And love, when it's real, always finds the cracks in the silence. See you in the next story.